2022 saw the highest LGBTQ representation on film in history, with Hollywood having the right kind of representation in almost 30% of their output. Yet GLAAD were unhappy about it, because that just wasn't good enough. So imagine what they must be feeling now, when representation hits a 3-year low. Let's find that out. GLAAD is an American non-governmental media monitoring organization. Originally founded as a protest against defamatory coverage of gay and lesbian demographics and their portrayals in the media and entertainment industries, it has since expanded to transgender people and assorted allies. The organization insists upon itself and demands that you take it seriously, and many in Hollywood do.
The natural bodies of administration, which are traditionally either elected by people at large or appointed by elected leaders of society, are being actively substituted by artificial bodies. The bodies of people, groups of people, whom nobody elected. Never. As a matter of fact, most of the people don't like them at all, and yet they exist.
Every year, GLAAD puts out a report called the Studio Responsibility Index, where they quantify representation in movies. And no matter who you are or where you stand, it's a depressive read. If you're an activist, it's depressive because there's no end goal, therefore no win can be big enough. If, say, 40% of movies have the representation that they want, that is no cause for celebration, because that still leaves 60% of movies without. And if you're not an activist, or otherwise not part of any of the wildly different communities with competing and mutually exclusive goals that have been lumped together under the LGBTQ moniker, it's depressing because 40% of movies were creatively compromised for the benefit of a special interest group representing between less than 10% and less than 5% of the population, depending on which statistics you buy. In short, there are no winners here. Just look at GLAAD's Studio Responsibility Index report from 2022, the year of peak representation, when the summary of their report read, LGBTQ inclusive films released from major studios have grown by 50% or 1.5 times since GLAAD's first Studio Responsibility Index was issued in 2013. 5 key film genres have seen substantial improvement in LGBTQ inclusion over the past decade. Superhero films, led by new inclusion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, kids and family films, romantic comedies, raunchy adult comedy, and action sci-fi horror. Wow, 50% increase across all of those genres in just a decade. With a gain like that, this is where most would take the win. But were GLAAD happy about this? Was this good enough? Were they happy when this report came out in 2022? Nope, of course they were not, because their response was LGBTQ characters remain lacking in total screen time, with the most recent SRI showing more than half appearing for under 5 minutes. Introducing more central and nuanced LGBTQ characters should be a priority as studios look to their development slates. Yeah, see there, studios? Despite a 50% increase, all your efforts up till that point were for naught. Disney, you turned the Eternals into a punchline for nothing, because GLAAD were still not pleased. Their 2022 report continued. Major studio releases have yet to consistently meet GLAAD's challenge to ensure that at least half of LGBTQ characters are people of color, only meeting this bar once in 2018. The most recent study found only 39% of LGBTQ characters were people of color. Oh wow. Only 39% of LGBTQ characters were people of color in 2022, so still 11% to go to get to 50%. But why is 50% even a goal? I mean, either they must think a much larger portion of the minority population is gay than in the majority population. Either that or wild over-representation relative to the actual population is the goal. Based on what came next, wild over-representation appeared to be the goal for their 2022 report continued. The most recent SRI is the first in 5 years to count a transgender character, and that character was ultimately a small role. For storytelling to improve in the next decade, there must be a number of new trans characters introduced each year who are fully fleshed out characters beyond their gender identity and existing in all settings, roles, and communities. In other words, presently not good enough. So, what reward did Hollywood get for going as inclusive as they did, in the process driving away their audience? Because in actual reality, the more you include, the more you exclude. Well, they got shamed by GLAAD for not having done enough, and told in no uncertain terms that they had to do better, especially when it came to trans representation. Well, maybe Hollywood didn't find their tone to be too inspiring, or maybe they decided that they were losing too many viewers in the majority population in their attempt at pleasing a special interest organization that won't be satisfied no matter what they do until 100% of movies have the required representation. Because let's fast forward to the just-released Studio Responsibility Index report from 2024, where GLAAD found that LGBTQ inclusion has dropped to a 3-year low. Now, let's emphasize that it's just a 3-year low. Historically, as in the past decade, it's still incredibly high. It's just not as high as last year or the year before that. GLAAD's key findings included LGBTQ inclusive films in 2024 dropped to 23.6% of major studio releases, down from 27.3% in 2023 and a record high of 28.5% in 2022. So in relative terms, we're only talking a 5% decrease here. But their findings continued. Only 2 films, less than 1% of all films tracked, featured transgender characters, and both included either harmful stereotypes or inauthentic casting. Though they did have what most would refer to as accurate representation. The findings continued. 37% of LGBTQ characters had less than 1 minute of screen time, relegated to insignificant and background roles. Only 27% of LGBTQ characters had over 10 minutes of screen time, a major decrease from 38% in the previous year. And this next bit must really have annoyed them. LGBTQ characters of color made up just 36% of all LGBTQ characters, down from 46% in 2023, the lowest since 2019. So, after getting closer to that arbitrary number of 50% the year before, Hollywood is now getting closer to reality, yet further away from the wild overrepresentation that GLAAD wants. They then started editorializing the numbers. The index arrives amid escalating political and cultural battles targeting LGBTQ people, particularly the transgender community and people of color. This is a serious accusation, and one they expect us all to accept at face value. Yet I see no evidence presented here to back their claims. That is par for the course for GLAAD, however, for their next statement is, well, in need of a few community notes, let's say. While inclusive storytelling has been proven to build empathy, shift public opinion, and drive revenue.
You serious, Clark?
The entertainment industry is increasingly falling short of its responsibility to the diverse audiences it serves. If anything, the data suggests the opposite of this claim is true. As visibility has increased, and perhaps especially the attempts at normalizing the T part of the equation, pushback has escalated, with empathy and all the other good stuff going down, not up. The MCU and Doctor Who in particular are also prime entertainment examples of franchises that should have exploded in popularity if GLAAD's claims had any validity. But instead, their own built-in audience have abandoned them en masse. That, of course, is the only reason why this most recent report reads so negative, from GLAAD's perspective that is, than did previous reports. Because Hollywood actually did do as GLAAD recommended in prior reports, and they were severely punished by the audience for having done so, so now they're rolling it back. That's the real, true reading of these reports. And this goes beyond the realm of entertainment, of course, as corporations have muted their Pride presence this year compared with previous years, and they've done so quite considerably and for the same reasons. They found that being too overtly representative harms their brand, and it harms their bottom line even more. GLAAD, of course, are in uproar about this and concludes their report with shaming the studios, repeating their narrative and talking points, which by now are proven not to work in reality. So, what to do here? Should Hollywood do as GLAAD demands, even though that has led to disaster in the past? Or should they walk it back completely and end any thought of representation at all? Well, of course not, no one is saying that, but they should take the middle path, like they used to before, back in the days of 1 decade ago, before any of this was artificially turned into a problem, which, ironically, only spawned more problems and discontent. Obviously, there should be representation of all kinds, and no one has ever said otherwise, but it has to be organic where Hollywood is concerned. And it can only be the focal point when the story explicitly calls for it. The actual data on the ground very clearly demonstrates that the moment you try to enhance representation for representation's own sake, the story will suffer as a result, as ideology was just put into the driver's seat. And that has happened so much in recent years that audiences are now hypersensitive to it. So much so that they, in some cases, see ideology where there is none. And that is Hollywood's own fault for browbeating the audience for years on end. While this most recent report may be bad news for a special interest group like GLAAD, it is actually good news for Hollywood, for the audience, and ironically, for the various groups that have been grouped together under the LGBTQIA banner, despite having mutually exclusive goals. Because if things return to the sensible center, the pushback will also subside. We will, of course, be following what Hollywood continues to do, and the response to it, whether it be pushback or not. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on that. And with that, please like this video, and let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.